as I mentioned, we're going to make this a little bit more interactive so that we can stay awake after dinner, but believe me, the information that these folks have to present, I think, would do it in and of themselves anyway. And the topic that we have for this panel is the future of energy policy. And we just discussed various issues regarding picking winners and losers. We're talking about the present and the recent past, but it's real interesting looking at what can be and what will be. And hopefully the two are the same in terms of can be optimistically and what will be our energy future. A lot depends on the decisions of policymakers here in Kansas, policymakers in Washington, D.C., but people often overlook, probably to a greater extent, folks who are involved in, just politically who are active. People who have a love for their country, people who have a love for their state, people who have a love for seeing our human condition better. And that can be legislators, that can be individuals, that can be people in industry. But when people become involved, believe me, you make a larger difference than you realize. I've had legislators tell me, and Representative Grande, I'm sure, can back this up, that for every time that they receive an email or a phone call from somebody in their district, they assign tremendous weight to that. I've had folks tell me they figure it's about 10,000 people represented by every email or phone call, writing letters to the editor to the local newspaper, calling in on talk radio. This is how people know what's going on in their district, because otherwise, oftentimes, what they're left with is what the media tells them is going on in their district. And I think most people realize what the media says is going on is different from the pulse of the people themselves. So, talking about the future of energy policy, I'd first like to get the panel going, and let me encourage, at the risk of encouraging you to be rude to each other, but feel free to interject. Don't wait for me to prompt with a new question, because your perspectives, all three of you have tremendous perspectives. But the issue that we talked about a little bit earlier that I think is key to our future for energy policy is hydraulic fracturing. And with that, I'd like to ask Ed regarding the Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association. Not just what's going on right now, but what do you see as the future for hydraulic fracturing, new technologies, and some that we may not even know about? Where do you see this going?
Well, yes, first of all, thank you for letting me be here today. It's an honor and a privilege to be here and to talk, and I would also like to say that it's an honor and privilege to serve the independent oil and gas industry in Kansas. Because those guys go out there every day and they risk their financial future because they think there's oil and gas in their next well or even the next 100 feet of well. And they truly embody the entrepreneur spirit of the American. And it's an honor and privilege to serve that industry. I am a geologist and have worked in the oil and gas industry for 28 years. And so I have been out in the field, worked with hydraulic fracturing and things before. And in Kansas, it's an amazing industry. We have the small producers. The average well in Kansas is about 3 barrels of oil per day. That's a small well. Here in North Dakota probably has a little bit higher production average than that. But in Kansas, that supports 67,000 jobs, $3 billion in family income, and $1.4 billion in state and local tax revenues. And what's important about that is that these guys go out there and they work these technologies, and they've used them for many years. The first well that was ever fracked in the United States was fracked in Kansas in 1947. And we have 57,000 wells now that our geologic survey says have been fracked in Kansas. And these are mostly vertical wells throughout the state. So it's a technology that has been, the industry has proved to be safe for many years. When we look at the production in Kansas, whenever, the industry has spent over $1 billion annually for the last 7 years in development of wells and in rural Kansas. And there's few industries that will spend $1 billion a year in rural Kansas. And so it's a technology that's been around for a long time. There's it's a safe technology that they've used, and it's a technology that it's basically we're putting sand and water in the ground with some chemicals in that to open up the natural fractures in the rock and allows the oil and gas that's in that rock to come back out to the wellbore. The vast majority of that, of course, is sand and water. There are some chemicals in that, but a minor amount. You say, well, what do you need chemicals for? But I can go through several things. But when we put sand in that water, you don't want all the sand to be at the bottom of that column of water. Our wells are about 5,000 feet deep, 4,000 to 5,000 feet. If you just pumping that sand with all that water on top of it, you couldn't push that sand in. So you'd like that sand to be spread out through that entire column. So you want to put some gel agent into that to make the water gel. But these technologies have been allowing the oil and gas industry in Kansas to prosper and to do well. I mean, our oil production in the state has gone up 37% over the last 10 years. And that's pretty good because, today we have 40,000 oil wells in Kansas, and on average, they would decline maybe 12% annually. So to see our production go up annually, you'd have to have a lot of drilling activity just to stem that decline, much less see that increase. And it's these technologies, whether it be hydraulic fracturing, drilling technologies, 3D seismic, and other technologies that allowed the industry in Kansas to become a big part of, dependable part of the Kansas economy.
Those are some good points, and especially when you talk about jobs, it reminds me of Landon in the earlier panel, talking about how the jobs that are being destroyed in Spain through government pushing renewable power mandates. And this leads me to ask Representative Grande here. In North Dakota, where we have so much of this oil in particular, and I guess as a side effect, natural gas production through these new technologies, what are you seeing on the ground there in terms of not just in terms of the industry itself, but across the economy? Is this a broad economic growth, or is this narrow to certain professions or certain industries?
Ray, did I get this turned on?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Across the board, it's very interesting because, yes, when the oil industry, they come in and people think of it as just that oil company, but that's not it at all. It starts from the landman in the courthouse, researching who the private owners are of the mineral rights, who's the private owner of the land rights, and that melts. The reason why North Dakota advances the way it does in the oil industry beyond other states, and why you don't see it moving in some other states, is we have our citizens own mineral rights. So it's all private ownership for the, not all, obviously we have some federal land, we have some states' lands, and there is some work being done on those. But if you take a look at the map, it's where the private people are benefiting from this, making millionaires on a daily basis across our state, that is generating all of this. And those are the landowners, those are the mineral rights owners. It's everybody wants to act like it's the big oil that's making all the money. Yes, of course they are, but they're paying the taxes and they're paying the rights to these properties, and they're creating all these jobs. They have to put the rig to the ground, and then it has to be fracked out, and that's a whole other group. Then you have your service industry that takes care of that well up to 60 years. So you have employment that's not just a one-day deal. This is multiple days of multiple structures of multiple people in different lines of work that will take care of this industry throughout 60 plus years. So it's a very important thing. But okay, we just brought in all these workers into the state of North Dakota, and where are they going to live? So now we've got construction crews that are going to work. We've got the Home Depots kind of things that have to come in with all the product, and you've got the other side of the service industry where we need restaurants, we need convenience stores, we need the gas stations, we need all of these, the diesel mechanics, everybody that's going to come through. So it's such a broad spectrum of people for employment that is just, it's overwhelming. Not to mention, when you move all these families in, now the schools expand, now you're hiring teachers, now you're hiring all that comes with education of the students. So it's just a wide spectrum, and when they talk about, unemployment, the employment rate 5%, well, we're under 3. I mean, we can't get enough people in, we can't get the jobs filled fast enough, and it comes from every level. We in North Dakota actually kind of chuckle at our current administration that says, well, we're going to raise the minimum wage to 10.10, and we're kind of going in North Dakota going, can we lower it to 10.10? Starting wages, if you're only getting paid $11, you're probably only sweeping floors. That's what we you get to pay sweep floors is at least $11 an hour. The wages and everything that goes with it are all up through the roof on that. We're seeing a little bit of a balance on that. We own a convenience store out on the western side, and hiring in our base people, we told them that we would take them in at 11 and $12, but they had to stay for 3 months, and then they could get into the $15 and $16 an hour. This is to run a till in a convenience store, to clean in the convenience store, and to work in shorter cook side. Now, where else do you see those kind of wages? And that's just the natural wages that you need to pay, but you needed to give them that incentive to stay, because the oil industry will hire them out from underneath you in a heartbeat. And the bankers did it to us all the time. We'd raise up a really good teller, and the next thing we knew, they were working at the bank down the street. And so it's a very competitive market for your employees. So employment is just a very big deal.
It blows me away hearing your stories, and I'm fortunate enough to know Representative Grande well enough that we've talked about this. The stories in North Dakota about the jobs that are available, about how, they can't even keep up with the housing for the jobs for the people, but it's something, of course, that's a good problem to have. And it's amazing when we talk about nationally this jobless recovery, where we have so many people that have given up even looking for work, and yet when we have a state that, instead of shackling energy production, is doing its best to make sure that it will continue unfettered, we see the difference in the living standards of the people in North Dakota versus in other states, and in particular in nations such as Spain, which President Obama holds up as an example for renewable energy advocacy and programs by the government. You look at the difference where in Spain unemployment went from 8% to 26% after those renewable programs were enacted, and we see the difference in North Dakota. Now, oftentimes when we're presented with this data, the media will try to take attention away from that. They don't want you to know about the 2.8% unemployment in North Dakota, about the fact you can earn 6 figures out in the oil fields pretty much out of high school. So Isaac Orr, as I mentioned, a research fellow at the Heartland Institute. By the way, he authored the policy study that you may have seen outside on the table. I encourage you to pick it up if you haven't. Looks like this. Analyze the economics, the environmental effects, etc. And what I'd like to ask you is that when the media is confronted with all the wonderful economic news, they try to paint a picture of environmental risks and harms and all these unregulated potential catastrophes. So tell us what you've discovered. Tell us what's going on in the real world in terms of environmental facts versus environmental myths.
All right, yeah, I've got 2 Google alerts set up for my writing purposes. So I've got one on hydraulic fracturing, and that'll tell me what the economics are and how it's benefiting the country. And the other one is fracking, and then I get all the news about how it's, going to be the end of the world. So it's really, it boils down to terminology a lot, and frankly, there have been no reported cases of groundwater contamination. I mean, the Department of Energy went through and they tried to find a way to trace the fracking fluid chemicals migrating up to the surface, and they weren't able to find any afterwards. So there's been multiple studies that have suggested that, if you do this right, it's like any job, really. If you do it correctly, there's a certain standard that a job needs to get done. Like, I grew up on a farm, so like if I cleaned the pens to a certain degree that weren't up to my dad's standards, I was in trouble, right? But if you do the job correctly, and whether it's, the company taking their own volition and doing that, or whether it's, a regulation that says this is how the job needs to get done, I mean, that's really what we're looking forward to. And it can be done in an environmentally responsible way.
I think one of the things that's kind of interesting that just came out was that the EPA now finally put out their guidelines on diesel and defining diesel for fracking purposes. They had been threatening this for quite some time, and North Dakota really is kind of this laboratory of hydraulic fracturing, and we try to stay one step ahead of what they're going to do next to us. And we've had companies, and I hate to call out names because I always tend to miss a few of them, but like Statoil or Halliburton or a few of these that have gone to work ahead of time to remove the diesel aspect out of the fracking fluid, so that now we kind of beat the EPA in its own game by cleaning up and getting it to a point where, and then also changed the type of diesel that was being used, which is just, you know, bizarre in that the way they wanted to define diesel was going to actually destroy farming as we know it today because of all the diesel that was being used. So the EPA kind of gets caught up in its own problems when they think they can come on a regulation basis. But they think that they can come out and destroy fracking by all these different little regulations. And one of the other little government things that always is a little story is the Department of Justice, the DOJ. Well, in North Dakota, they're not known as the DOJ, Department of Justice. They're known as ducks over jobs because they came in and tried to shut down a bunch of our oil companies because various birds landed in when we had open pools by the fracking sites, and some of them died, and so of course shut down everything, shut down the jobs for a few of these ducks that were, you know, let's not talk about how many birds get killed on a highway in North Dakota on a given day. It's always kind of those interesting things where they want to come in. We actually won. There was only one company that settled out, and the others took it to court, and they won on that. And the Department of Justice had to step back from that. What was really an interesting scenario in that as it played out, we had a lot of talk about wind. Have you heard about how many birds are killed by the wind and the windmills? Nothing wrong with that, according to this administration. But boy, we had 27 ducks or birds that landed in these pools, 27, and they wanted to shut down the industry. That's the fight we have.
That's really interesting. Oh, go ahead, Ed.
I was going to add, you know, anytime I speak a lot about hydraulic fracturing and different things, and one of the questions that I have gotten several times before from the crowd is, what's the worst case scenario? They'll say for fracking. You know, they may give an example of the BP spill in the Gulf, and they'll say, you know, they said that was the worst case scenario. What's the worst case scenario for hydraulic fracturing? And you know, that's not really a difficult question because I know what the worst case scenario for hydraulic fracturing is. That would be putting a ban or moratorium on it. Because if you did that, you would lose 2.9 million jobs across the United States, including 5,000 to 7,000 Kansas jobs. See the GDP of our country go down $374 billion. You know, so that's you know, that's the economic impact, and that would be the worst case scenario for a technology that has not had one verified or documented instance of harm to groundwater. You know, so those are some of the things. But I would like to add, you know, one of the technologies that across the country that has really added to this is the horizontal drilling. Really, that's the technology that has opened up these reserves more than hydraulic fracturing can. Because now they can go out, and they go out as much as 2 miles horizontally. They go down, in North Dakota, they may go down, you know, 9,000 or 10,000 feet vertically, and then go out 9,000 or 10,000 feet horizontally, and hit an area the size of a hard hat, pinpoint that. You know, so they're able to get these fields that they've always known the oil was there, but they couldn't access the reserves. And they found over 20 new oil fields all across the United States that could add $1 trillion to the U.S. economy. And 1.3 million new jobs by developing these fields, and it's really put us on our way toward energy independence. You know, over 5 years ago, we were importing over 60% of our oil needs in this country, and today that's somewhere around 34–35%, and it's still growing because these technologies are accessing that. And so, you know, when you talk about technologies, you know, the oil and gas industry has done a great job of developing those technologies and accessing the reserves.
And the beauty of having our own reserves and bringing it and showing that we have the ability to bring energy to our own, from our own soil, brings us national security. And that's the aspect that this particular administration fails to understand, is the national security aspect of having our own energy independence. There's 2 things that make us independent: our agricultural, you know, keeping our agricultural industry running, and our energy industry. Those are national security issues.
What's real important to keep in mind, a couple of things that just you're prompting me here. The ability to have a strong national defense, of course, is dependent upon a strong economy. when folks are looking at short-sighted plans that harm our economy for other motives or goals, that is going to harm our ability to be self-defense, self-sufficient more than anything else. Ed mentioned worst-case scenarios, and it really calls to mind a good illustration when people bring this up. When we had the BP Gulf oil spill a couple of years ago, once-in-a-generation oil spill, which, by the way, with new machinery, Helix Corporation has now a rig they can send out anywhere in the Gulf within 48 hours and cap the same spill even 2 or 3 times more powerful. So it cannot happen for all practical purposes again. But even so, when we did have the oil spill, President Barack Obama took the opportunity to go on national television and talk about how this proves that we need to have more wind farms. Now, of course, wind farms don't power automobiles, wind powers for electricity. It's a totally different product than oil, gasoline, etc. But here's when we talk about worst-case scenarios. This once-in-a-generation worst-case scenario, according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, it was responsible for the deaths of approximately 6,000 birds and marine mammals. But each and every year, while only powering 3% of our electricity, according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, wind turbines kill 440,000 birds, including many endangered species. And if you throw in bat populations, you're now at 1.4 million per year. And that number is only going to go up when we set aside more and more market share. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't think anybody here is necessarily anti-wind, anti-solar, whatever. What we are is pro-affordable energy. And I would hope the day will come when other technologies can produce energy as affordably as natural gas, coal. I don't think it's going to happen. But it's not so much anti-this or pro-that as far as affordable energy. And oil, natural gas, coal, etc. These are sources that provide those benefits in terms of enabling us to afford a strong defense, etc. What I would like to ask here, let's go back to Ed. And by the way, I'm glad that you were piping in a little bit there, Betty. That's good. You mentioned about how we're having an increase in oil production. The same is true for natural gas, and how we're back on the road towards having. I don't know if we're certainly not back to being self-sufficient, but if we had wise policies, or a better way to define it would be if we were to remove some of the unnecessary shackles on oil and natural gas production, how feasible is it that we would once again be producing as much as we use, like was the case in the 20th century?
You asking me?
To start?
Yeah, okay. I think the policies that we had the right energy policy, we very well could be energy independent within just a couple of decades in this country. And not only energy independent, but look at the manufacturing renaissance that goes on there. They have cheaper energy. They're able to create more manufacturing jobs. It creates a manufacturing revolution as well, which creates even more jobs here in the United States. So, whenever you look at our energy, and President Obama often claims credit for the fact that our energy imports have been are going down, but I think everybody understands that that's really not because of his policies. That's despite of his policies, because the production is coming from private and state lands, not from the federal lands that are there. But so if we could have policies that allow us to continue to explore oil and gas, I think we very well could be energy independent within just a few decades.
I'm going to give Barry credit for all of the above. But yeah, it's amazing how manufacturing is having a huge renaissance thanks to the natural gas revolution here. The Association of Manufacturers says that by 2025 there'll be about 1 million jobs that are manufacturing jobs, especially for energy-intensive industries like aluminum processing, steel processing, fertilizer processing, that will be, as a result, a direct result of the shale boom. So we're going to be moving a lot of jobs back over from China too. Half the world's steel is produced in China. And now we have Austrian steel firms building plants right in Texas because they can take advantage of low energy prices. So, not only are we able to create jobs here, we're able to bring some back. So fracking, in a lot of ways, is the opposite of outsourcing.
Absolutely, and I, and that has been talked about over the last few years as this is starting to progress and we move through this and we start to see, I mean, Kansas is just scratching the surface as to how much they can be pulling out of the ground. North Dakota, we're not even 15% in pulling out what we have the potential to pull out. California has one of the largest fields that's sitting there, and it's basically untouched in Baker. And what's interesting about that is California actually has asked our North Dakota regulatory industry to come and help them write their rules so that they can match up with North Dakota's rules because it works there. And California is actually willing to look at not over-regulating, but working as a companion with the industry, which is a big, big step. Once we can get to the point where we can loosen up the federal lands, you've got a Utah that is sitting there waiting for an opportunity to someday, as my legislative friends in Utah say, grow up and be like North Dakota. And so they want to be able to participate in this boom too. And I think it has awesome potential all the way around.
Let me ask, and I'll ask Isaac to answer first, and of course, Betty and Ed, if you'd like to also address this. Natural gas now, with the revolution that we've had in technologies for production and also the new finds, we're seeing natural gas powering electricity more and more, which is responsible for reducing emissions of all sorts and also, of course, reducing electricity prices. But are there other feasible economic uses that you would see in terms of the science, but also in terms of the economics and the policy for natural gas? Are we going to see natural gas put to other uses, whether it be automobiles or manufacturing? What's the future?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a big market share for that. I'm not necessarily sure how much transportation is going to be affected. There are a few gas stations, even where I live, which is the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, that are starting to sell natural gas. But I think part of the transportation sector is going to be limited by just the availability of it. It's going to be hard to go to the gas station and pump it in there because a lot of them aren't equipped in order to handle that. So that's probably going to have, kind of a limiting factor on the ability of natural gas to become more widespread when it comes to vehicles. But then again, if the market hits, if we have these low, stable natural gas prices, and I mean, that's not going down anytime soon. One of the reasons natural gas was kind of a problem before this whole shale revolution was because the prices were so volatile. But now that we have so much natural gas, I mean, can you imagine what natural gas prices would have been during the polar vortex? I mean, they're already 4 times lower than they used to be, thanks to hydraulic fracturing in certain spot markets back in 2005 were like $16 per million BTUs. So if you took that price, and I don't know, what did natural gas go up during the polar vortex? 4 or 5 times? So, I mean, you multiply 16 by 4 or 5 as opposed to 4. I mean, it's a huge difference. I mean, that is a huge difference in the pockets of everybody, really. So, as far as transportation is concerned, it's going to depend on how many terminals we can get out there. But there's already a huge difference there. GE, I believe, is building trains powered by natural gas. They're getting trucks to run off natural gas, semis and all that kind of stuff. So, it's going to have a great effect on the economy until the regulators get their hands on it and start taxing it the way that they tax gasoline and diesel fuel. So right now we're kind of in this sweet spot where state and federal regulators haven't put their road use taxes on that, and that's just going to happen. It'll happen eventually. They'll catch up to it. But right now, if you have I actually read a Popular Mechanics article that said it's really not that hard to do it yourself, but you'll get slapped with a huge fine from the government if you do it. So yeah, the potential's there. You just got to figure out how to refuel.
And let me ask one more question, and then we'll turn it over to the audience so I don't monopolize the topics here. But of late, I've been reading a good deal about how in North Dakota, as you have the increased oil production, that they are having to burn off much of the natural gas that is produced incidentally. And here in Kansas, it's not so much a problem. So perhaps Ed, Betty, and also Isaac, can you tell us what would be conducive to seeing that natural gas that's produced as a byproduct of the oil production doesn't just get wasted.
Well, I think, you know, North Dakota, when we went into this, we didn't go in looking for the natural gas. This is just the byproduct for us. So it was kind of that process where we were willing to let it be flared off until it could be naturally captured and taken care of in an economical way, and it wasn't a big issue to us. We have been working slowly towards having more and more pipeline and direct into processing. So that in this last legislative session, what we did was we gave incentives to the companies to start getting it captured quicker, transporting it, and dealing with it in a proper way. For us, it's kind of that byproduct. You know, we haven't gotten to where we're interested in utilizing it. I don't want to sound real negative there, like we don't care. We do, but what we're hoping to do is allow industry to make those adjustments without over-regulating it. As North Dakota has gone through all these processes, the industry is using North Dakota as the laboratory to find out the best practices for how to get everything done. And they came to the table, they actually came to our industrial commission last month and said, here's a plan we have and how we want to move towards the capture and the process and how long it will take us to get to 100%. And they're only looking at a few years before they're capturing it almost 100% from the wells. So we're working on it, and we're using it more of, instead of over-regulating them to do it, we're incentivizing them to move through the process.
I also think ultimately just the price of natural gas needs to go up in order to kind of incentivize them to do that. And I give the industry a lot of credit as far as there's a new generator, and like they use a lot of generators, a lot of engines in order to pump all this fluid down in there, because the average frac well is 2 to 4 million gallons, and then you've got all the sand that goes down in there too. So all these generators run on diesel fuel for now, but they're finding new ways in order to get that to run straight off the natural gas that they're pumping out of there. So they're finding ways to have cost-saving measures without necessarily capturing all of it. So ideally, like they would be able to do that to fully utilize the amount of natural gas that's being, given off in the Bakken region. But until natural gas prices go up, ultimately that's their big selling point. If they can get more money for the natural gas and make it economically viable to build all the gathering lines and that sort of thing, that's probably the biggest incentive for them.
And in Kansas, we just, the oil and natural gas industry has been here for quite some time, and we have the infrastructure here that's been in place and closer to market. So they have a lot of the gas gathering infrastructure already in place from when the Hugoton field in southwest Kansas that came in the 1920s, I believe, when they first started drilling that. So they have a lot of that infrastructure already here, even for the smaller gas gathering facilities today.
And actually, John, I lied. I'm going to ask one more quick question. Ed, Kansas particularly, but also government in general, what can and should government do to maximize our utilization of affordable oil and natural gas?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the government should. The best thing the government can do for the oil and gas industry is just get out of the way, and let them do their job out there. And if they can do that, then the oil and gas industry is going to produce the oil and gas and let the market drive those decisions.
Yeah, Senator Powell from Kansas, and I'm originally Grande. I'm sure they probably looked at it, but what would the Keystone Pipeline approval mean to North Dakota production?
Well, Keystone has an effect both ways for North Dakota. We have been guaranteed a certain amount of barrels to go into the Keystone. I always was nervous when people would tell us that we were going to put our sweet crude into this Keystone pipeline with that sand cars thick stuff. because it's so sour, but we actually went up in the Trans-Canada lines, showed us how they keep it separate and they won't ruin our good sweet crude. But since we didn't get it, we're doing our own pipeline work. But more importantly, we switched to rail and we continue to truck. And in doing so, it actually was beneficial to North Dakota. Now, some people are kind of, well, what? Gee, we want the Keystone. You know what, great, if the Keystone gets done, it gets done, and that's great, because it gives us another opportunity to get more oil out. And we need an opportunity to get more oil out. But with what it did is it gave the companies and then ultimately my citizens, because they're the landowners, they're the private, they own the mineral rights, they get to take their oil and look at the market, and now they get to decide, are we going to go to West Texas or are we going to Brent? And they get to play the prices and decide, are we putting this on pipeline today or are we shipping it on rail? And they're making more off of it because we get to play the markets more. So yes, at first it was kind of, boy, we really need this. But in the meantime, we're putting in our own lines, we're connecting in different ways, we're shipping different ways, and we're using that rail.
The current edition of Trains magazine has an excellent lead article on oil and its transportation and economics. They make the point being able to go from North Dakota, any place in the country, unless they're oil. Excellent article.
I actually have a question. One thing that wasn't touched on in our program, so I'm going to touch on, is earlier this year the EPA kind of relaxed the regulations on ethanol mandates. So the whole idea of we should be burning corn to make fuel. That's a great first step, and I know there's been a lot of push to actually either repeal or roll back that federal ethanol mandate. How's that playing in states like North Dakota and Kansas, and do you think further rollback of that's going to happen?
You know, I think they're having a hard time rolling back the ethanol thing because you're playing the farmer against the oil field. I really kind of think that's what's happening. I am not a fan of favoring one over another, picking winners and losers out of the government. The government, that's not their job. If ethanol is worth having, ethanol should be economical enough to do it and have ethanol. Same with the wind. I don't have a problem with it. I just want it to work on its own. I shouldn't have to raise it. And that's my problem. Do I mind having ethanol? No, I don't. But you know what? When I go to the gas station, I want to have choices. And if I don't want ethanol in my tank, I shouldn't have to put ethanol in my tank. That's part of my problem with the mandate side of that. I think that, you know, that it needs to play its own self out, and we just need to get out of the pushing it part of the industry.
No, I wouldn't have anything to add. I agree with all that. Yeah.
Hello, I'm just having one small question. Is natural gas as a fuel for trucks and so on, is that liquefied natural gas?
Yeah, they condense it.
It's condensed. Isn't it?
Yeah, otherwise it'd be really hard in order, because you'd have to have a huge tank. So what they do is they condense it. A lot of times, like garbage trucks, they actually refuel at the landfills that they take it to, because, I mean, methane is a very common gas, so.
Well, do they have compressing pumps there
Yeah.
that do that for? And the natural gas that we get in our homes is just piped in its natural state, isn't it? I mean, as gaseous gas. It's not liquefied at all. Is it?
I believe they do some condensing, because like gas is so disparate that they have to, you know, compact it in order to make it, I don't know, more viable in order to transport. So I believe there is a certain processing that it goes through. I'm not exactly positive about whether it's liquefied. I don't think it is. I think it's still in a gaseous state because it requires an intense amount of energy in order to compress all that.
And I can't claim to be an expert on the different types of things, but I know that they have talked about that the natural gas we're burning off isn't as pure as it needs to be to utilize. Like, I couldn't take it off of the oil field and direct it into your home to burn it. Okay? It has to be processed. It has to
I
be.
think we have an answer.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Sarah Tice, and I'm with ExxonMobil XTO. Thank you. You do have several forms of natural gas. You have the natural gas that when it comes off the field, there's some cases where the natural gas can be used from the field. But in a lot of cases, it has to have water removed, or it may have to have H2S removed, or a lot of times we want to remove the liquids because they become valuable for other things, like using in refineries or chemical facilities, we use them as feedstock. And so the heavier components of the natural gas. And then, so it is compressed some to the pipe and with pressure, you're right. And then, but for the compressed natural gas vehicles, it is compressed further so that it can be stored in a workable space with a car or truck. And there's a lot of corridors that people are trying to work on for compressed natural gas vehicles, things like that. The American Natural Gas Association Alliance has information on ANGA about that. And then there's liquefied natural gas, and it is chilled to about negative 260 degrees. And that is when I say all the molecules get real cold, so they hold together, and that's where you get that actual liquid form that is used for peaking stations in some parts of the U.S. I think we'll see it more for some kinds of electricity generation. They'll use liquefied natural gas, and then it's what you would use for an export natural gas. You use a liquefied natural gas, and all they do when it gets to the next wherever they're going to land it is they warm it back up and put it in a pipeline, the same as the natural gas that you get today to turn on your stove or to use for your heater or something like that. So that's kind of the distinction between the three parts for those that are interested.
John, I'll take the moderator's prerogative and ask a question if I can. Yet another one. Saudi Arabia seems to benefit greatly from exporting oil, yet regarding our newfound natural gas abundance, just a few years ago we were talking about building the LNG import facilities, but now we may have the opportunity to export, and of course oil conceivably too. So the question would be, some folks are saying that it's better to keep our natural gas here, and I guess maybe a couple decades from now our oil. Are there good arguments for keeping the natural gas and perhaps oil here in the United States, or will we see the same benefits that Middle Eastern nations do from exporting their natural resources? Yeah, how about you, Paul?
I'll start. Yeah. Well, crude oil for one is a global commodity, and so even if you kept it here and said we're only going to use it here, anything that happened in the whole world would affect the crude oil price even here in the United States. So if you had a disruption in Nigeria or something, it would affect the crude oil prices here even if we kept the same ones here. So whenever it's a global commodity like that, anything that happens in the world will affect the prices here.
I think one of the issues with export, we're not looking at exporting the refined product. What we'd like to do is be able to export the crude because we do not have the refining capacities. And I mentioned earlier that the Bakken and Three Forks and Tyler, that this is a sweet crude. It's refined different than the refineries that are already available. And it's very costly, and it's a very slow conversion process to take some of these refineries and make it so that they can do the sweet crude. Otherwise, they're mixing it and they're doing different things with it. Well, we would like to see refinement in the United States, but it's just not going to happen, and it takes too long to get it done. And with that, we need to be able to export for refinement.
Aren't they building one in Dickinson?
That's a natural gas.
Oh, okay. I think we have time for one more question, but I'm sure our speakers will be around for a little bit if you have other questions. So.
My name is Rod Makers. I'm with EIF. I'm wondering, what are the prospects for getting new refineries open here in the U.S.? Because we've been here for many years. It's not been happening. What are the prospects?
With this administration, none.
I would agree. You know, that's it's very difficult to, impossible to get a new refinery built. And I know that the existing refineries have expanded over the years to be equivalent to several new refineries, but it's like Representative there said, the refining capacity is a big issue. If we could export some of the oil out, that would open up some refining capacity to allow our oil here to be able to have markets to be refined. Because Kansas too has a sweet crude oil that we would like to get to markets.
Okay, well that concludes the questioning. I'm hoping and assuming that John Nodorf can still hear me, because I assume he has some concluding remarks. If not, I have my own, but he may not want to hear them. John, do you have concluding remarks? I assumed you might.
I will let you do any concluding remarks you
Oh
want.
my goodness, okay.
So gracious.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for being here. As I said, I know it's an evening session, and you're giving up your own personal time, and that means a great deal to us. I'd like to thank all the folks who have sponsored this meeting. It's not just the Heartland Institute. John mentioned them earlier. One thing that we want to make sure that we're doing, speaking for the Heartland Institute, is bringing the message of affordable energy to the various states. And the reason why we're here in Kansas, one of the reasons, is that we work with legislators and allies in states throughout the nation. And I'm not going to mention any others, pro or con, but I will say that there is, in my mind, there's a Mount Rushmore of state legislators with whom we work, who are just fantastic on the issues. And Kansas is one of those four on our personal Mount Rushmore. So I personally would like to thank especially the legislators that are here, those that couldn't make it for other commitments, but who I hope will hear about this session. So I'm hoping we can just give them a round of applause for fantastic work. One of the things I hear from the environmental activist sympathetic media is they are losing their minds that they are no longer playing offense on these issues. Instead, they're playing defense. And here in Kansas, this is one of the battleground states where we're bringing sanity, we're bringing economic truth to the discussion and environmental truth. So keep in mind that whether you're a legislator here, whether you're with a particular industry, whether you're here as a private citizen, all of us make a difference. Our voices are heard. And you can see it in public opinion polls. You can see it in what's going on in the state legislatures. We're not just here in Kansas, but North Carolina. You see it in Ohio. You see it in other states around the country where they're looking to, whether you want to say repeal, or softer, roll back, or softer, soften, or even softer, revise. Nevertheless, we're starting to see momentum for a better energy future here in Kansas and here in America. So thank you so much. If you have any questions, feel free to send us emails, give us telephone calls. We're here to provide information, and you folks do far more than you realize. So thank you so much. Have a great day.